Hi everyone, welcome back to KG Graves. I thought I'd try recording an introduction in the evening to give it a bit more effect. I hope you like it. Back in July 2011, I went to Illinois to visit the grave of the 16th US President Abraham Lincoln. Also visited his hometown of Hodgenville, Kentucky. As usual, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.
A stunned, sad sea of mourners lined the streets in the rain as Abraham Lincoln's casket was taken from the White House to the Capitol on the day of the assassinated president's funeral. Tens of thousands of people filed past the body lying in state, but millions would see it as Abraham Lincoln made what is probably the most extraordinary train journey in American history, home to Springfield, Illinois. He carried not just Lincoln's body, but that of his 11-year-old son, Willie, who had died of typhoid fever in 1862. It left Washington on April 21, 1865, its route covering nearly 1,700 miles. It stopped in state capitals and major cities such as Philadelphia, New York, Cleveland, Chicago, but avoided the places where Confederate sympathizers might have made trouble.
The president was under construction at the time of the assassination, and they tore all the inside structure out of that.
Abraham Lincoln was born on the 12th of February 1809 in Hodgenville, Kentucky, USA, to parents Thomas and Nancy. He was the 16th US President. He was a descendant of Samuel Cornett Lincoln I, 24th of August 1622 to the 26th of May 1690, an Englishman who migrated from Hingham, Norfolk, England, to its namesake, Hingham, Massachusetts. There is a bust in the church in Hingham, which I visited on the 2nd of August 2012. Thomas and Nancy married on the 12th of June 1806 in Washington County and had 3 children, Sarah, Abraham and Thomas, who sadly died as an infant. On the 5th of October 1818, Nancy Lincoln died from milk sickness, leaving 11-year-old Sarah in charge of a household including her father, 9-year-old Abraham, and Nancy's 19-year-old orphan cousin Dennis Hanks. 10 years later, on the 20th of January 1828, Sarah died while giving birth to a stillborn son, devastating Abraham. On the 2nd of December 1819, Thomas married Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, with 3 children of her own. Abraham became close to his stepmother and called her Mother. Abraham was mainly self-educated and was an avid reader. As a teen, his father grew more dependent on him to help on the farm to keep the family afloat. Abraham was regularly hired out to work, and by law his father was entitled to everything he earned until he came of age. Abraham was an active catch wrestler during his youth. He became county wrestling champion at the age of 21. In March 1830, fearing another milk sickness outbreak, several members of the extended Lincoln family, including Abraham, moved west to Illinois, a free state, and settled in Macon County. He eventually decided to move out and made his home in New Salem, Illinois. Speculation persists that Abraham's first romantic interest was Anne Rutledge, whom he met when he moved to New Salem, but she sadly died on the 25th of August 1835. He took the death very hard, saying that he could not bear the idea of rain falling on Anne's grave. This led to him sinking into a serious episode of depression. In the early 1830s, he met Mary Owens from Kentucky. Later in 1836, Abraham agreed to a match with her if she returned to New Salem. Mary Owens arrived that November and he courted her. However, they both had second thoughts. On the 16th of August 1837, he wrote her a letter saying he would not blame her if she ended the relationship, and she never replied. In 1839, Abraham met Mary Todd in Springfield, Illinois, and the following year they became engaged. The wedding date was set for the 1st of January 1841, but was cancelled at Abraham's request. However, they reconciled and eventually married on the 4th of November 1842. While anxiously preparing for the nuptials, he was asked where he was going and replied, "To hell, I suppose." Abraham was an affectionate husband and father of 4 sons. The eldest, Robert Todd Lincoln, was born in 1843 and was the only child to live to maturity. Edward Baker Lincoln, Eddie, born in 1846, died on the 1st of February 1850 of possible tuberculosis. His third son, William Wallace, Willie Lincoln, was born on the 21st of December 1850 and died of a fever at the White House on the 20th of February 1862. The youngest, Thomas Tad Lincoln, was born on the 4th of April 1853 and survived his father, but died of heart failure at the age of 18 on the 16th of July 1871. The deaths of their sons Eddie and Willie had profound effects on both parents. Abraham suffered from melancholy, a condition now thought to be clinical depression. Later in life, Mary struggled with the stresses of losing her husband and sons, and in 1875, Robert committed her to an asylum. During 1831 and 1832, Abraham worked at a general store in New Salem. In 1832, he declared his candidacy for the Illinois House of Representatives, but interrupted his campaign to serve as a captain in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. When he returned home from the war, he formed a partnership with 21-year-old William Berry, with whom he purchased a New Salem general store on credit. Because a license was required to sell customers' beverages, including alcohol, spirits and liquor, at 12 cents per pint, and take-out food, Berry obtained bartending licenses for $7 each for Abraham and himself, and in 1833 the Lincoln Berry General Store became a tavern as well. Berry became an alcoholic, was often too drunk to work, and Abraham ended up running the store by himself. Although the economy was booming, the business struggled and went into debt, causing Abraham to sell his share. In his first campaign speech after returning from his military service, he observed a supporter in the crowd under attack, grabbed the assailant by his neck and the seat of his trousers, and tossed him aside. Unfortunately, he lost the election, finishing 8th out of 13 candidates. The top 4 were elected, though he received 277 of the 300 votes cast in the New Salem precinct. Abraham's second State House campaign in 1834 was a success and was followed by 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives for Sangamon County. He was admitted to the Illinois bar on the 9th of September 1836 and moved to Springfield and began to practice law under John T. Stewart, Mary Todd's cousin. He emerged as a formidable trial combatant during a cross-examination and closing arguments. On the 27th of January 1838, Abraham, then 28 years old, delivered his first major speech at the Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. After the murder of 2 men, newspaper editor Elijah Parrish Lovejoy in Alton and an innocent black man, Francis McIntosh, was burned alive in St. Louis, Missouri in 1836, this prompted Abraham to run for president. Through his Springfield practice, he appeared before the Illinois Supreme Court in 175 cases. From 1853 to 1860, one of his largest clients was the Illinois Central Railroad. His legal reputation gave rise to the nickname Honest Abe. In 1849, he received a patent for a flotation device for the movement of boats in shallow water. The idea was never commercialized, but it made him the only president to hold a patent. Leading up to his presidential campaign, Abraham elevated his profile in an 1859 murder case with his defense of Simeon Quinn Peachy Harrison, who was a third cousin. Harrison was also the grandson of Abraham's political opponent, Reverend Peter Cartwright. Harrison was charged with the murder of Greek Crafton, who, as he lay dying of his wounds, confessed to Cartwright that he had provoked Harrison. Abraham angrily protested the judge's initial decision to exclude Cartwright's testimony about the confession as inadmissible hearsay. He argued that the testimony involved a dying declaration and was not subject to the hearsay rule. Instead of holding Abraham in contempt of court as expected, the judge, a Democrat, reversed his ruling and admitted the testimony into evidence, resulting in Harrison's acquittal. The debate over the status of slavery in the territories failed to alleviate tensions between the slave-holding South and the free North. Abraham did not comment on this until months later in his Peoria speech of October 1854. He then declared his opposition to slavery, which he repeated en route to the presidency. He said, "I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself." In 1858, Stephen A. Douglas was up for re-election in the US Senate, and Abraham hoped to defeat him. The Senate campaign featured 7 debates between Abraham and Douglas. These were the most famous political debates in American history and drew crowds in the thousands. Abraham claimed that Douglas represented a conspiracy to promote slavery. Though the Republican legislative candidates won more popular votes, the Democrats won more seats, and the legislative re-elected Douglas. However, Abraham's articulation of the issues had given him a national political presence. In the aftermath of the 1858 election, newspapers frequently mentioned him as a political Republican presidential candidate. While Abraham was popular in the Midwest, he lacked support in the Northeast and was unsure whether to seek the office. In January 1860, he told a group of political allies that he would accept the presidential nomination if offered, and in the following months several local newspapers endorsed his candidacy. Over the coming months, he was tireless, making nearly 50 speeches along the campaign trail. By the quality and simplicity of his rhetoric, he quickly became the champion of the Republican Party. On the 9th and 10th of May 1860, the Illinois Republican State Convention was held in Decatur, where Abraham received his first endorsement. On the 18th of May, at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, he won the nomination on the 3rd ballot. The Republican Party's production of campaign literature dwarfed the combined opposition. The Chicago Tribune writer John Locke Scripps produced a pamphlet that detailed Abraham's life and sold 100,000 to 200,000 copies. Though he did not give public appearances, many sought to visit him and write him. In the run-up to the election, he took an office in the Illinois state capitol to deal with the influx of attention. On the 6th of November 1860, Abraham was elected the 16th president. He was the first Republican president, and his victory was entirely due to his support in the North and West. No ballots were cast for him in 10 of the 15 southern slave states. The South was outraged by his election, and in response, secessionists implemented plans to leave the Union before he took office in March 1861. On the 20th of December 1860, South Carolina took the lead by adopting an ordinance of secession. By the 1st of February 1861, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. 6 of these states declared themselves to be a sovereign nation, the Confederate States of America, and adopted a constitution. The Upper South and border states, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and Arkansas, initially rejected the secessionist appeal. President James Buchanan and President-elect Abraham Lincoln refused to recognize the Confederacy, declaring it illegal. The Confederacy selected Jefferson Davis as its provisional president on the 9th of February 1861. Attempts at compromise followed, but Abraham and the Republicans rejected the proposal. On the 4th of March 1861, he made his first inaugural address. On the 11th of February 1861, Abraham gave a particularly emotional farewell address upon leaving Springfield. He would never again return to Springfield alive. He travelled east in a special train. Due to the secessionist plots, a then unprecedented attention to security was given to him and his train. En route to his inauguration, he addressed crowds and legislatures across the North. The president-elect evaded suspected assassins in Baltimore. He travelled in disguise, wearing a soft felt hat instead of his customary stovepipe hat, and draping an overcoat over his shoulders while hunching slightly to conceal his height. On the 23rd of February 1861, he arrived in Washington, D.C., which was placed under substantial military guard. He gave his inaugural address to the South, proclaiming that he had no inclination to abolish slavery in the southern states. Abraham cited his plans for banning the expansion of slavery as the key source of conflict between North and South, stating, "One section of our country believes slavery is right and ought to be extended, while the other believes it is wrong and ought not to be extended. This is the only substantial dispute." By March 1861, no leaders of the insurrection had proposed rejoining the Union on any terms. Meanwhile, Abraham and the Republican leadership agreed that the dismantling of the Union could not be tolerated. In his second inaugural address, he looked back on the situation at the time and said, "Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish," and the war came. Major Robert Anderson, commander of the Union's Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, sent a request for provisions to Washington, and Abraham's order to meet that request was seen by the secessionists as an act of war. On the 12th of April 1861, Confederate forces fired upon Union troops at Fort Sumter and began the fight. This was the start of the American Civil War. On the 15th of April, Abraham called on the states to send a total of 75,000 volunteer troops to recapture forts, protect Washington, and preserve the Union, which, in his view, remained intact despite the seceding states. This call forced states to choose sides. Virginia seceded and was rewarded with the designation of Richmond as the Confederate capital, despite its exposure to Union lines. North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas followed over the following 2 months. Secession sentiment was strong in Missouri and Maryland, but did not prevail. Kentucky remained neutral. The Fort Sumter attack rallied Americans north of the Mason-Dixon line to defend the nation. Abraham took executive control of the war and shaped the Union military strategy. he painstakingly monitored the telegraph reports coming into the War Department. During the war, Abraham constantly replaced failing generals in an attempt to take control. General George B. McClellan was one such general who was appointed, removed from the position, and then reinstated after his successor failed. 2 days after McClellan's return to command, General Robert E. Lee's forces crossed the Potomac River into Maryland, leading to the Battle of Antietam. That battle, a Union victory, was among the bloodiest in American history. In the spring of 1863, Abraham was sufficiently optimistic about upcoming military campaigns to think that the end of the war could be near. In June 1862, Congress passed an act banning slavery on all federal territory, which Abraham signed. In July, the Confiscation Act of 1862 was enacted, providing court proceedings to free the slaves of those convicted of aiding the rebellion. On the 22nd of July 1862, he reviewed a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation with his cabinet. On the 1st of January 1863, keeping his word, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves in 10 states not under Union control, with exemptions specified for areas under such control. His comment on signing the proclamation was, "I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this paper." By the spring of 1863, Abraham was ready to recruit black troops in more than token numbers. Abraham spoke at the dedication of the Gettysburg Battlefield Cemetery on the 19th of November 1863, known as the Gettysburg Address. In 272 words and 3 minutes, he asserted that the Union was born not in 1789, but in 1776, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He defined the war as dedicated to the principles of liberty and equality for all. He declared that the deaths of so many brave soldiers would not be in vain, that the future of democracy would be assured, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Defying his prediction that the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, the address became the most quoted speech in American history. General Ulysses Grant had been victorious in so many battles, so Abraham promoted him and he assumed command of the army. Grant began to weaken Lee's forces. On the 1st of April 1865, Grant nearly encircled Petersburg in a siege. The Confederate government evacuated Richmond and Abraham visited the conquered capital. On the 9th of April, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, officially ending the war. Abraham ran for re-election in 1864 under the label of the New Union Party. On the 4th of March 1865, he delivered his second inaugural address. In it, he deemed the war casualties to be God's will. Determined to reunite the nation and not alienate the South, he urged that speedy elections under generous terms be held. His amnesty proclamation of the 8th of December 1863 offered pardons to those who had not held a Confederate civil office and had not mistreated Union prisoners if they were willing to sign an oath of allegiance. The Lincoln administration presided over the expansion of the federal government's economic influence in other areas. In 1864, the National Banking Act created the system of national banks. The US issued paper currency for the first time, known as greenbacks, printed in green on the reverse side. Abraham is largely responsible for the Thanksgiving holiday. Thanksgiving had become a regional holiday in New England in the 17th century. It had been sporadically proclaimed by the federal government on irregular dates. The prior proclamation had been during James Madison's presidency 50 years earlier. In 1863, Abraham declared the final Thursday in November of that year to be a day of Thanksgiving. John Wilkes Booth was a well-known actor and a Confederate spy from Maryland. Though he never joined the Confederate Army, he had contacts with the Confederate Secret Service. After attending Abraham's last public address on the 11th of April 1865, in which he stated his preference that the franchise to be conferred on some black men, specifically on the very intelligent and on those who serve our cause as soldiers, Booth hatched a plot to assassinate the president. When Booth learned of the Lincoln's intent to attend a play with General Grant, he planned to assassinate the president and Grant at Ford's Theatre. Abraham and his wife attended the play, Our American Cousin, on the evening of the 14th of April, just 5 days after the Union victory at the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. At the last minute, Grant decided to go to New Jersey to visit his children instead of attending the play. At 10:15 in the evening, Booth entered the back of Abraham's theatre box, crept up from behind and fired at the back of his head, mortally wounding him. Abraham's guest, Major Henry Rathbone, momentarily grappled with Booth, but Booth stabbed him and escaped. After being attended by Dr. Charles Leal and 2 other doctors, Abraham was taken across the street to the Peterson house. After remaining in a coma for 8 hours, Abraham died at 7:22 in the morning on the 15th of April. Abraham's body was placed in a flag-wrapped coffin, which was loaded onto a hearse and escorted to the White House by Union soldiers. President Johnson was sworn in later the same day. 2 weeks later, Booth, refusing to surrender, was tracked to a farm in Virginia. He was mortally shot by Sergeant Boston Corbett and died on the 26th of April. Secretary of War Stanton had issued orders that Booth be taken alive, so Corbett was initially arrested to be court-martialed. After a brief interview, Stanton declared him a patriot and dismissed the charge. The late president lay in state, first in the East Room of the White House, and then in the Capitol Rotunda from the 19th to the 21st of April. The caskets containing Lincoln's body and the body of his son Willie travelled for 3 weeks on the Lincoln Special Funeral Train. The train followed a circuitous route from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, stopping at many cities for memorials attended by hundreds of thousands. Many others gathered along the tracks as the train passed with bands, bonfires and hymn singing, or in silent grief. African Americans were especially moved. They had lost their Moses. Abraham's body was buried at Oakridge Cemetery in Springfield and now lies within the Lincoln tomb. In surveys of US scholars ranking presidents conducted since 1948, the top 3 presidents are generally Lincoln, Washington, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. In the 21st century, President Barack Obama named Lincoln his favorite president and insisted on using the Lincoln Bible for his inaugural ceremonies. Lincoln has also been admired by political figures outside the US, including German political theorist Karl Marx and Indian independent leader Mahatma Gandhi. Lincoln's portrait appears on 2 denominations of United States currency, the penny and the $5 bill. He appears on postage stamps across the world. He has been memorialized in many towns, cities, and county names, including the capital of Nebraska. The United States Navy Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, is named after him, the second Navy ship to bear his name. The Lincoln Memorial is one of the most visited monuments in the nation's capital and is one of the most visited National Park Service sites in the country. Ford's Theatre, among the most visited sites in Washington, D.C., is across the street from the Peterson house where Abraham died. Memorials in Springfield, Illinois include the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, Lincoln's home and his tomb. A portrait carving of Abraham appears with those of 3 other presidents on Mount Rushmore, which receives about 3 million visitors a year. I visited Mount Rushmore on the 1st of August 2017. An influential statue of Abraham stands in Lincoln Park, Chicago, with recastings given as diplomatic gifts standing in Parliament Square, London, and Park Lincoln, Mexico City. Let's see where his grave is located. So there you have it, the grave of Abraham Lincoln, 16th US President. As usual, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, see you on the next one.